And we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm super excited today to be joined by Daniela Barbosa. She is the Executive Director of Hyperledger Foundation, coming to us live from Vegas. I've never been able to say that before. I'm so excited. Daniela, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, winter storms in San Francisco got me delayed, so I had to stay one more night in Vegas, which is not so bad. And they upgraded me to the suite when I told them I was doing your show this morning. So there you go. That's why I have a great view of the Vegas Strip right behind me.
That's the pulling power that Blockchain Won't Save the World has. Upgrades and one extra night in Vegas.
You
Daniela, I'm
got it.
delighted for you. Let's try and keep this short so you can get out there and go and live the movie that you live in on a day-to-day basis. So for those people who don't know you, for those people who haven't been following your trajectory, your rise to fame and influence, could you give us a little bit of your background? What does your role as Executive Director mean at Hyperledger Foundation? And then we'll get into some of the deeper questions. Does that sound good?
Sure thing. Yeah. Well, Anthony, I think you and I have known each other probably since 2017 when I joined the Hyperledger project at the time, alongside working with Brian Behlendorf, who's the executive director. And the Hyperledger project had been recently formed in 2016, was the first year that companies came forward to launch the Hyperledger project at the time. So I've been here it's gone on 5.5 years. And in 2021, in the fall of 2021, I took over the role as executive director as Brian Behlendorf went off to one of the other projects, which is the Open Source Security Foundation, really working on critical requirements from a security perspective for open source, which includes all our projects here, obviously, at the Hyperledger Foundation. I've seen the enterprise adoption, the ebbs and flows of enterprise blockchain use cases, and also just the industry as a whole. And I think today I'd love to talk to you about what we're seeing as really a gathering of both public and permission blockchain use cases and companies. And it's been really amazing. Like as executive director, I get a chance to lead our communities of developers. We are a developer community. Our global community of contributors around the world, and we'll talk about what kind of growth we see in that community, and also our members. So we are a member-driven organization, and many of our members have been supporting the Hyperledger projects for 7 years, and really continue to double down on the work that they're doing within Hyperledger technology. So it's great to be here.
Fantastic. And we're very, very happy to have you. Great introduction, great scene setting for the show. As a reminder, for anyone listening in, this is a live LinkedIn Live Q&A. So any questions you have for Daniela about her job at Hyperledger Foundation, any of the projects, anything going on around enterprise blockchain, Web3, how she sees what's going on at this point in time, please do put your questions in the comments and I will do my best to multitask and pick those questions up. Also, give us your GMs, BDs, BJs, Bs, BTs, wherever you're coming in from around the world. Let us know where you're dialing in from, because it's always interesting to know where the community is, and we'll try and keep maybe some of the examples relevant to where you guys are in the world. So last time out, we had probably 20 or 30 different countries represented, which is nuts. So thank you so much for dialing in wherever you are in the world.
It's amazing. We're truly global.
We are truly global. So let's get into it, Daniela. I think a lot of the current challenge around people's understanding of Hyperledger is related to the fact that Fabric, one of the many projects in the constellation, is the most well-known, maybe most well-used or most understood of the different projects. But I think people don't get the full context of actually what is Hyperledger Foundation more broadly. So if you could start us off with, what's been happening, I guess, in your reign as executive director, and maybe over the last 12 months in Hyperledger Foundation more broadly, to help set the scene for people?
Sure. So, one of the things is since 2017 or since 2016, the launch of the Hyperledger project, the market has truly changed. And the tools and the projects that we've brought in or that the community has actually created within the Hyperledger Foundation really made a change, because we are no longer just one project, right, or a few projects. And in 2021, we decided, and this was work that we had been working on for a while, and Brian Behlendorf was also involved in this work, is that we were more of an umbrella organization an open source foundation that is an umbrella of projects. So project portfolios are really addressing enterprise needs across blockchain and blockchain related use cases. So in 2021, we rebranded the Hyperledger project, which was very well known as a project, and primarily, as you mentioned, Hyperledger Fabric was the top use, and I'll talk a bit about its adoption today as well. And we rebranded to the Hyperledger Foundation because if you look at the timeline of how projects came into the foundation and how communities have been built around these different projects, I'll very quickly go through it. In 2016, 2017, Hyperledger Fabric, distributed ledger technologies, permissioned networks, most adopted permission DLT still in the market. There was other projects that came in, Hyperledger Sawtooth, Hyperledger Iroha. These were all frameworks that were really focused on building enterprise use grade DLTs for permission networks, all with their unique ways of consensus and the way of operating the frameworks. In 2017, at the end of 2017, we brought in a project called Hyperledger Indy, which was a digital identity focused distributed ledger framework with tools that really enabled digital identity use cases. So that was in 2017. And there was additional projects that came later on that year, if you recall, Hyperledger Burrow. So we started understanding, and Burrow was the first EVM project within the Hyperledger Foundation, or the project at the time, and we understood that Ethereum ecosystem was going to be eventually very interested to the enterprise. Now, in 2017, Anthony, I know you were probably in conversations with customers bringing up Ethereum, and you probably got thrown out the door, right? Said, we don't talk about this stuff over here. You go over there.
The door, rarely the window, but I know what you mean.
Why don't you go hang out with your ICO buddies or something. But the interesting thing is, in many of these discussions, we would be in the room, and in the room, there were certainly developers and engineers who were very interested in Solidity, for example, in how smart contracts within the Ethereum main network. And these were, technical challenges and technical things that they were mostly interested in. So Burrow was a great addition because it brought us into that world, and also from a developer perspective to be able to address some of those needs. If you fast forward a couple of years, we started actually extracting things from Hyperledger Indy from a digital identity perspective, right? And this becomes the portfolio of projects that we have. Hyperledger Aries, obviously very important when you're creating digital wallets and agents around digital identity for verifiable credentials. Just last year, another project called AnonCreds, which is anonymous credentials. It's one of the most used anonymous credentials out there. And those got extracted, right? So first, permission DLT, that's how we started. Then we started looking at the identity stack, what are identity and EVM with Burrow. And then in 2019, we also brought in a little project called Besu. And Besu was a contribution by consensus into the Hyperledger Foundation. And Besu today is really an option when developers and companies are interested in, from an Ethereum perspective, because you could run Hyperledger Besu both as an Ethereum client. It's actually the fourth execution client on the mainnet right now. Or you can run it as a permissioned blockchain, a permissioned blockchain. And I think goes back to those developers where you were sitting in the room and I was sitting in the room in 2017 and 2018 that were very interested in mainnet work and development. That is really allows them to have the optionality to think through how they're doing. So you could see here, and there's more to that, and I'll continue talking if you want, but I'll stop there and see. You want more? Okay. So then what happens? It is hard. It is so hard for enterprises and developers to do implementations of blockchain. You don't just drop a blockchain and then it's all done, and isn't it great, and we're a blockchain enabled, right? These are systems that are tied into other enterprise software systems, right? So how do you go about making that easier? So if you look at the projects that were brought in or organically grew from our communities, we have projects like Cacti. And Cacti used to be called Cactus because a cactus is one cactus. And last year, we actually had a major contribution from IBM with Weaver, which was in our labs. So Weaver and Cactus were joined to make Cacti. So multiple cactuses equal Cacti. And that is an interoperability project where we have contributions from Accenture, from Fujitsu, from IBM, and many others, because guess what? There's not one blockchain to rule them all. And you know this, right? And it's going to be networks of networks. So how do these networks interoperate? So Hyperledger Cacti is really addressing, once again, that maturation of the market and where the enterprise is using these technologies and how they need to use these technologies across networks. So that was Cacti. And now there's some great work also happening with a project, for example, Hyperledger Bevel, which is really about extracting that complexity of how implementations are done. So helping developers and architects, really deploy these systems faster and easier. And then last but not least, when you think about Web3 and kind of enabling this ecosystem, we've had people building NFT platforms, successful NFT platforms since 2018. I'll give you an example. Panini, I don't know if you know Panini. They're about 100-year-old company, right? And they offer NFTs. In 2018, they actually launched the Panini blockchain network, and it uses Hyperledger Sawtooth very quietly, right? There wasn't a big bang, hey, this is blockchain, and we use this platform. But in essence, if you go to Panini, they're still trading NFTs that are driven by Hyperledger technology behind the scenes. So since 2019, we've had Web3 and NFTs and a lot of these use cases as well. And in 2021, we brought a fantastic project called Hyperledger Firefly. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but Firefly is really, taking out that complexity of digital assets and, transfers from that middle layer. And Firefly supports multiple DLTs, which means that you can run Firefly on top of Fabric, on top of Besu, on top of Corda, on top of Quorum, on top of Polygon, and many other public blockchains. So really enabling enterprises to use these tools very successfully. So that is like a fast forward. I usually take 1 hour to go through the timeline, and I probably miss some things that are really critical to our community. But let's stop there, and happy to dig into any of those items.
There you go. I don't think I've heard it delivered better. And for people who are still thinking that Hyperledger is synonymous with Fabric and only Fabric, if you didn't know, now you know. So many different projects. I mean, even before we got into the project overview, I think it's important for people to realize, like you said, it's a member-led organization. It's open source. These are projects that are available for people to use. This is not a for-profit, for example. The very, very similar architecture as an organization to layer one blockchains, as people will look at in terms of Ethereum or Avalanche or Polkadot or any of the above, right? So I think people need to realize that this is not a corporate entity as such. What you have said is, yes, clearly the audience is enterprise or enterprise focused, which means enabling digital transformation by use of distributed ledgers or use of blockchains, public or private, wherever that may make the most sense, and making it the easiest for people to deploy with, because Linux Foundation and Hyperledger Foundation are born out of experience with enterprises, not necessarily an institution full of degens, although there are some. There are many, actually.
we hide in the corners.
But I think that's super important for people to realize. And thank you so much for taking the time to do the whistle stop tour through what's gone before.
And can I narrow in on one thing you said, which is the enterprise? So I'm actually here in Vegas because in the last 2 days, I've been at the FinTech meetup where, a lot of payment companies and banks, small, medium, large banks, interesting conversations over the last 3 days for sure. But all the conversations, and I was on a panel with Visa and R3, specific around CBDCs, stable coins, and tokenization of assets, right? And the conversations that we were having on the floor, right, was about these technologies as being critical infrastructure to the future financial systems, right? And they realize that to build these future infrastructure systems, they want to build with technology that is open, that is not just open source, but it's open development, right? To your point, right? That people can actually have influence and contribute to the code bases. And very importantly, that it is enterprise focused, right? That it is, has, for example, a project lifecycle that gets it into a stage. For example, Fabric today, right? It already has 2 LTS releases. It has a very, very, if you are building and if you have, a system that is in production using Fabric, you understand where Fabric is going and how to go about influencing where Fabric is going as well. And this is really important part of like what the Linux Foundation does for these open source projects is we make them open, we make them open development, and very importantly, make them enterprise grade so the enterprises can trust that they're building infrastructure that is going to be there, it's going to be secure, it's going to have a commercial ecosystem supporting it as well.
And I think that's non-trivial and might be lost to a few people is the standards or the level of specification or level of requirements for software that's being used in any enterprise, right? The burden of proof continues to get higher year on year because we've had non-Web3 software that has bugs in it. We have all sorts of software that has bugs in it. Many CTOs and CIOs over the years have been stung by being wedded to a particular stack or particular providers for a period of time and having bad service or bad experience. And so they say, well, we don't want any more of that. And so every year the bar gets higher. Every year the requirement for simplification gets higher because people want to try and minimize the amount of churn or the amount of technical debt in the stack. And as a result, all of that then gets pushed to the Hyperledger foundations of the world, the other organizations who are building software, and it becomes harder and harder. And people really think, oh, I'll just take a blockchain, plug it in, and everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got the regular just process and systems change, right? Just adding tokens, coins, crypto to any organization immediately affects legal, probably IP management, definitely treasury, and definitely accounting and finance. And they all have systems.
And your corp com people.
Yes, and especially them, if you're going to build in public. So the requirement for transformation, integration, standards, and complexity in working with enterprises, it's not simple. And unfortunately, that means things go a little slower than they do in the pure Web3 world or in the startup world. That is why fintechs and insurtechs move faster than most banks and insurance companies do. I think glaciers move faster than most insurance companies do, but still, it's not a simple playground. So I think, sorry.
I'll give you a recap of a conversation I had with a banker this week. And it was how basically he asked the question, we were talking about project governance, like how the project governance of these open source projects actually work, right? Who makes the decisions as to what gets, approved into the code base and how to, all that. So we were having a great conversation. I think, he was not, an open source, he was a newbie, let's say, in this space. And he asked me a very simple question. He's like, how am I supposed to go to my executive team and use, say we're going to use software. We don't know, how this is being developed. We just know that there's this a guy who looks like a green frog who's doing all the commits on this protocol. And I said, but this is the reality of it. Like, he was serious. And I said, well, this is, very different from maybe some of the other projects you've been looking at, because to your point, there needs to be some accountability and some understanding of who is maintaining and who's working on the code as well. Some of our projects have gone through ATO, which is the authority to operate at the federal level, including Fabric. And one of the other ones is currently going through it as well. And this is important because when governments are using technology and implementing it into, infrastructure, into projects that, if I told you what they were, or if I knew what they were, I probably wouldn't be here. That it is very critical to make sure that the security, that, the process is well documented, that there's a way to influence the code. And, this is what we do here at the Hyperledger Foundation for all our projects.
Nice. And so it is entirely appropriate moderate intermediation between open source distributed systems and technology that is able to then back in and be accepted into the kind of the Web 2 world that's trying to adopt it. And while we're there, shout out to all the Pepe PFPs and GitHub and all the guys with their commits.
Tag me on Twitter.
Exactly. Go find Daniela on Twitter. She's great fun out there, and she'll look forward to your comments. So let's take a little bit of a look at your last, I guess, 2 years after taking over from Brian. So Brian Behlendorf, obviously some decent sized shoes to fill in terms of taking over as exec director for Hyperledger and now Hyperledger Foundation. What is it that you've obviously spent a long time in the organization, but now you've got the reins, now you've got the executive directorship. What did you want to bring through? What did you want to change? What was your kind of mission and vision as you came in as executive director? Because I don't think we ever had that conversation between the two of us. I'm really interested, when you take the top job, what is it that you see or that you wanted to come in and make your own?
Right. Well, I'm pretty lucky because Brian was always a partner to us. We run a very flat organization here at the Hyperledger Foundation, across all foundations at the Linux Foundation. And it's important because, there's some members of our team today who are really leaders in the space as well. So we have Hart Montgomery, who's our CTO. So one of the first things I said is, I'm going to bring in a CTO that has been part of our community for a long time. And I got lucky to bring Hart in as the CTO. Hart has been part of the Hyperledger community since 2016. He was part of the technical steering committee for 4.5 years, or actually 6 years. It was probably the hardest thing that I had to tell him was, hey, you can be our CTO, but you can't be on the technical steering committee anymore because it's not allowed. So bringing in, that kind of talent, we have our community architecture team that we built out is being led by David Boswell, and has Rye Jones, who's been with the project for 7 years, and Sean Bowen, who came in, who's an identity expert, really coming in from the identity space, is building out the team that is going to meet the needs of the community, right? Both the member community and the developer community. We've also built out a great ecosystem team led by Karen Atoni, who's been doing some spectacular work around stable coins and CBDCs and kind of financial services. She's off on maternity leave right now, so we can't wait to have her come back. But building out the team was one of my core things, and Brian and I always did that very deliberately in bringing in people into the Hyperledger Foundation. One of the things that we had been seeing was that there was a shift in the kind of projects that we want to actually host and house under the foundation. So things like Hyperledger Firefly, for example, Hyperledger Solang, which was one of our newest projects as well, which is for Substrate. And it's a great little project, but bringing in technical projects that address more than just permission distributed ledger use cases. So my goal and what we're looking to do is to recruit open source projects into the Hyperledger Foundation for projects that value Hyperledger as a brand from an enterprise perspective, that value the community that we've built, that we've had over 1.2 million contributions into the Hyperledger projects over the last 6 years, with 30,000 committers. Value that kind of environment and bring their code over to us to build their communities with us together. We made changes, very important changes, for example, in our charter over the last year and a half, to make sure that our technical oversight committee is positioned to best support the new projects the current projects and the new projects that are coming on board. We've made changes to the project charters. So the maintainers are always queens and kings of their projects. And we want to be very clear that they do, but that they have project services. So David Boswell and his team have really led describing and defining what project services are for these open source projects. You don't just come in, drop off your code, and everything magical happens, right? So really getting the staff involved with the community, with the maintainers, for them to understand what kind of projects they get. When you bring something into a lab, versus when you have a graduated project, right? The project lifecycle is very clear, and we're actually doing some work right now with the technical oversight committee to make sure that is even clearer and valuable to the maintainers. So that was one of the things, really getting hands-on with the community, understanding and building a structure for the project maintainers and the community contributors to be successful. And then for the members, the companies who are obviously sponsoring a lot of the work that we do, having a place for the members to be able to talk about what they're building with the Hyperledger technologies. Our webinar programs consistently get many attendees and people who are interested in learning about what people have been built. Our meetups, we have over 80,000 people that participate in our global meetup community. Every single day, there is a piece of content that the Hyperledger community is doing. I do that with very limited staff because we've put the frameworks in place in order for our community to be able to take advantage of that. So that was really, the core things that I wanted to do. I wanted to drive the Hyperledger Foundation. I wanted to drive the way that projects are maintained and basically managed from project services, and help the community kind of grow organically on its own. One of the most delightful things that I have to do in my job is, I attended 2 weeks ago, I attended the India regional chapter They did an event, like a 4 or 5 hour event. And the India regional chapter, we published an ebook around the growth of Hyperledger in the India community recently as well. It's on our website. Has really just grown. I think there was a 20% increase in the last 2 years in participants. And that developer ecosystem is so important to Hyperledger. So how do we pay attention to those kind of things? So really, figuring out the resources and how to match the developers, match what the member needs are, and matching our global ecosystem as well.
It's some vision. Shout out Hyperledger India chapter. Shout out all the Hyperledger chapters, actually, because as again, like you described, as a self-organizing group, the meetups, the content, the freely available videos, walkthroughs, content guides, all of the stuff that comes out, like you said, is developed by the community, as it is in most of the rest of Web3, frankly. But Hyperledger has been doing it for a long time, probably doesn't get the credit for establishing these kind of methods of governance, these methods of kind of maintaining projects, which again probably comes from even further before in terms of Linux days. And so people sort of assume that Web3 invented all of these things, but actually a lot of the time it was just building on the shoulders of things that had gone before, which is super powerful. I also really liked something you mentioned there about Hyperledger being a conduit for maybe the kind of public chain or other Web3 entities to come and interface with those, or those projects looking to interface with enterprises or looking to work with enterprises, because that is the experience that you bring. That is the depth of technical understanding, or the depth of just the processes you've been through to get some of your software released, tested, integrated, deployed, used, fed back on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's modest, but certainly less enterprise development experience in Web3 these days. But like you said, consensus and Ethereum and Solidity. You mentioned Substrate, Polkadot. Also, I heard Charles Hoskinson from Cardano talking about Midnight and looking to kind of create integrations with Hyperledger Fabric as they look at their enterprise-focused privacy sidechain. These are really exciting times, right? 2016, 2017, you would never imagine, right, a collabo between Fabric and Ethereum, or Fabric and Polkadot, or Fabric and Cardano. But now look at you. It's incredible.
Polygon, no, all of them. It is, and one of the things that this is definitely something that, we've been tracking and spending a lot of time with, specifically our members and our community on, which is this topic of what we call hybrid blockchains, right? Where use cases where a permission distributed ledger is being used, but there is attestation or minting or liquidity being created on a public chain. So I'll give you two examples. Both one is with Hedera. And Hedera has a plugin into Fabric as well, and they were one of the early to do hybrid use cases, I would say. So for example, there's a platform called Toko. And Toko is actually DL Piper. And for those of you who don't know, DL Piper is one of the world's largest legal firms in the world. And Toko is basically doing real asset tokenization, and it uses Fabric as well as Hedera in order to create the liquidity on the Hedera net. Another use case is IPW, which is an intellectual property use case. Imagine, Anthony, you got granted an intellectual property grant, right? And you have it, you have a license. What do you do with it, right? You can't sell it. You can't sell portions of it. You go from VC to VC, right? You're a small, startup or something. You go from VC to VC saying, look, I have this patent, so I'm going to build this great thing. And the VC, great. And you go from VC to VC. What if you could take that patent and actually tokenize it and sell it, right? And create your own money in order to then invest into your business. So that use case, the IPW, it's IPW with Casper Labs. And that's another use case. And I think there's some blog posts on our website that outline some of the work that they're done. So we're seeing more and more of these hybrid use cases where I think the technologies blend. And I think, you hit it all around on the ball, right? A lot of public layer ones and layer twos as well are very interested in seeing how they can connect into these enterprise use cases as well.
Love that. And for those who weren't listening, or just to play it back, reasons why the public-private interoperability or connectivity makes sense: unstoppability, right? Transparency, access to liquidity, right? There's a huge amount of capital or value that's presently stored, moving, liquid on public chains or on layer one protocols. And so actually being able to tap into that as a startup that has a digital asset or a physical asset, hugely powerful. And that can be done with some of the base code being Hyperledger and some of it being available and connected out to public chains. So super interesting to bring back on that. We're getting loads of good questions in the chat, so I'm really excited to make sure we've got enough time for those.
And I'll give you
another one. We got another one.
I can only wait. The other is, using Hyperledger projects, for example, Besu, in a public permissioned way. So LACchain is one of the use cases. LACchain out of Central America, so Latin America. The Inter-American Bank has basically funded the project for LACchain, working with their partners in the region to build a public permissioned blockchain that can be used across many use cases from a government perspective and end users and businesses. They just celebrated their first year anniversary. They are running on Hyperledger Besu, and it's a great use case of how the banking industry wanted to create this infrastructure, basically blockchain infrastructure for the region, in order for the region to be able to build blockchain use cases and projects on top of LACchain, right? And we have a case study on our website as well. And the other is EPSI in Europe, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and another use case that is using Hyperledger, building these public permissioned blockchains in order to meet, because they need the governance. The governance can't just be permissionless, right? The governance needs to be part of a central government, centralized government option as well. So lots of great work that's happening in that space.
Very good to hear. And again, it's not everyone's going to love that when you hear it, but if we're looking for adoption of distributed systems, we are going to bump up against large current intermediaries, and we're also going to bump up against governments, whether that be for regulatory purposes or whether that be because systems and just the authorities that are there today are the governments, and that at least we're seeing trials of distributed systems and distributed ledgers that are open source, that are not maintained by any one central party, etc., that they are creating platforms on which multiple others can build, that are not proprietary, that are not closed, that are not unfair in terms of how the economics play out. Generally speaking, I believe this is a good thing. And I say generally speaking because there will always be examples where something is not architected with great governance principles, or something is not architected to be fair for the participants, or is not egalitarian in some way. While we're on this, we'll jump ahead because this is where we are already. We're at this place now. If you'd sat down, we were having a coffee in 2016, 2017, we'd probably be, I don't know whether we'd be despondent or whether we'd just be slightly sad about the fact that it was us versus them, or them versus us, or there was a positioning of, if you're in the DLT camp, your technology isn't valid, or public chains are all ropey and dangerous and maintained by Pepes, so therefore unusable. And I think neither of those things were true at the time, but it did feel more adversarial. Do you still feel like the public versus private conversation is happening or valid, or because of what you said around more hybrid architectures or more use of both components of the stack, this really isn't an either or anymore?
Right. But I mean, I'll tell you, how I got to Hyperledger was not permissioned blockchains. How I got to Hyperledger was because I was very interested in Bitcoin, in what was happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. And I really thought from a technology perspective, it was going to be something that the enterprises adopted. Brian had to do some convincing of me to join the Hyperledger project at the time. And also because, many of the companies I was actually, speaking with, there were small startups in the crypto space, were trying to pay me in Bitcoin. I probably should have taken those jobs, and I would be really rich. I'd be like, instead of Vegas, I would be in the Caribbean somewhere talking to you. But so I personally always thought that the enterprises would get to a level where there were public use cases, right? That was going to be a need for public use cases. And I think we're there. I think it's moving a little bit slower than many of us perhaps anticipated. A lot of it has to do with the big busts, right? I mean, in 2017 we saw that with the ICOs, and then we couldn't even talk about blockchain. We had to pull out our blockchain is not Bitcoin, slide again, which I recently refreshed because again, it's a conversation that we've had. And then obviously last year with FTX, a lot of the conversation was like, oh my goodness, crypto. And even, this week, right, the executive office, the Biden executive office just put out a very large report that is a bit scathing. I haven't read the whole thing, but a bit scathing the blockchain technology as a whole. So we still need to do a lot of education, but I don't think it's a this or that. I think there's opportunities for both. And if there's use cases that need to be completely public, by all means, that's what the technology is there. Go out and build it and build a community and build the use cases and structure. But don't try to kill other projects that are bringing value to companies, to individuals, and to governments around the world.
It's really well put. I love the way you phrase that. And it reminds me of something that I heard from another show that I was listening to today, which is that, by default, enterprises should be transparent, governments too, but by default, applications should be privacy preserving. And this is the technology that we generally tend to believe can and will enable that. It's unlikely to be cloud databases. Or at least, we're kind of somewhere on a spectrum, and that more likely Web3 technology and distributed systems will take us to that place. Part of it is that those organizations don't want to go there yet, or that's a scary or unusual place. Intermediaries don't want to give up their authority, or governments again will struggle until we see good examples to give up the authority, or to be able to at least pass some of the responsibility of managing certain processes and systems to computers, to technology. And then you've also got accessibility and so on. I wanted to get your take broadly then on where are we on the pendulum of positive, negative, bullish, bearish, in terms of your outlook for enterprise blockchain. How are you feeling at the moment from the conversations that you're having, from the conferences and from the members discussions that you're having? Where are we on the timeline right now?
Yeah, well, the timeline's long. We've always said the timeline was going to be long. One of the first things when I joined in 2017, I would say, we want to get to a point where actually we don't talk about blockchain anymore. Right? Because it just becomes, part of any system, right? You don't go to a website and say, hey, this was built with great JavaScript. Maybe you do because you're a nerd, but most people don't, right? And, people just don't care. Now, when the first websites were built, we did look at what the JavaScript was and how the code with the HTML, right? But no one does that anymore. And we can look at technology over technology over technology and say, this just becomes part of, infrastructure, becomes part of systems. So we still have a long, long way to get to that, for sure. But I feel very bullish because of the conversations that we have in financial services, in governments, the implementations that we're seeing across governments from Canada to Europe, to Latin America, to Asia Pacific, right? Really, really advancing these use cases. I think, you mentioned the insurance industry before, right? So we actually have a project here at the Linux Foundation called OpenIDL. It is a blockchain network for regulatory reporting using. And in that project, you actually have state insurance regulators working with the insurance carriers within the project themselves to build out the OpenIDL network that they'll be doing. And things move slow, like these things move slow, and there's a lot of questions around the complexity of setting up these networks. One of the reasons that one of our projects, Bevel, Hyperledger Bevel, is part of our project portfolio now is because it removes that abstraction, right, of the complexity of rolling out these systems. So in order for enterprise blockchain to be, completely at a point where we can all say, hey, our job is done and we can go home, there's a lot of work that still needs to get done because it is enterprise software. It's very complex in the way that it's implemented. But I'm feeling very positive. Our Hyperledger Foundation continues to grow. Last year, we welcomed 26 new members into our community. We have a bunch of other ones that we're going to be announcing leading up to Consensus in Austin. We're going to be there for the 3 days. In our booth, we're going to have our member companies doing presentations and demos numbers of projects that they built using all the Hyperledger projects, Fabric, Besu, Firefly, etc. So there's a lot of activity happening in our community. So I'm feeling pretty positive just based on the conversations that I have. But everything's tied, with the economy and with big busts. We go up and we go down, but we all just keep smiling.
It's a lot going on, but like you said, I mean, it is a long road. Digital transformation is rarely simple, particularly, we're not just putting front ends on things, we're replacing back ends. And if anyone who's ever been through a core banking transformation project, as I have, realizes that, they start off with great ambitions, great intentions, modest budgets, and end up with very large and very overspent budgets, lots and lots of frustration, and half of the functionality delivered that they actually intended to in the first place.
Getting governance right, and especially when getting governance right is the hardest, especially in the consortium models, and getting the business right. And this is something I always tell people, because people are like, "Oh my God, this one failed, this one failed." If you think about it, even if it's a large company and they're creating a new business using new technology, with new governance and partners, and all this complexity in that sense, startups. Anthony, how many startups fail? Do you know what the number is?
It's either 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 actually succeed. Yeah. I think that it's getting better.
Yeah, but it's not so great. It's 9 out of 10 is the latest, right? So if you think about it, like, businesses just constantly have to try, and innovate and try new things as well. So yeah.
And super important that we recognize that even if we do see failures of projects, or we see teams running out of budget, or technology not performing as intended, that we shouldn't go straight to the cancel button. We should probably try and hit the pause and learn button before we hit cancel. I realize that's increasingly difficult these days. But you see, so many Web3 projects come out, try something new, try something different, and get insta-canceled when something doesn't go according to plan. Now, obviously, there are rug pulls out there and projects that are the less well architected, or less well thought through, or nefarious in nature. But generally speaking, the one thing that's great about this technology and the projects and the infrastructure that's being built now is it allows us to fail faster. We may still fail, but that doesn't mean that the technology is not worthwhile, that the architecture wasn't sound, or that the economic model may not necessarily have great value in future. But unfortunately, cancel culture kicks in a little bit too quickly for my liking these days, and we've seen that with a few of the different early projects. I've got a question here in the comments from Mauricio, which I'm just going to bring forward now because he asked it. Has the failures of some of the early DLT projects changed your outlook, or changed the way that you think about the future for enterprise blockchain or enterprise DLT?
I think it's up to the companies that are actually doing the implementations, right? The Hyperledger Foundation, we're here to host the code, to build those developer communities, and then how it's implemented is really up to the companies doing the implementations, right? And the governance models. So I think there's been a lot of learnings, and some of them hard learnings from some of these large failures. I think that specifically in topics like trade finance, there's new trade finance networks that have taken those learnings and have actually built what we hope would be better systems in order to be able to use the technology to do that. So I think that I know that you have to learn from those failures, that it's not technology. The technology has been proven to scale. The technology has been proven to deliver on the things, the efficiencies, the ROI that these different companies are putting out forward. It really is getting the governance in that the business model correct in many of these use cases. And there's a lot of researchers, a lot of people doing academic work to look very deeply into these things and how they worked and how they didn't work, and where things should be different moving forward. But that's really not our domain in the Hyperledger. We want to, in the Hyperledger Foundation, our domain is really to make sure that the technology is enterprise grade, the technology is scalable, that very importantly, there's a commercial ecosystem to support that technology in the marketplace, so that then organizations can build out their new businesses on top of them.
For sure. Super important. And again, not often appreciated the importance and effort of tools and frameworks and libraries that developers can use without necessarily having to be deep experts in Fabric code base or in Solidity code base, etc. Trying to create those SDKs that people can use and spin up or save time on projects will actually shorten the project lifecycle, will shorten the budgets, again, will allow us to get up the curve, where some of those early projects, I mean, consider them as, some of the early stage internet e-commerce businesses, probably not around anymore because the model that they came up under, or the assumptions that they came up under, were no longer true 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so,
and if you look at the code and the new features that Fabric or other projects within the Hyperledger Foundation have over the years, it just reflects those use cases and those learnings and the things that optimize the frameworks in order to meet the current needs and the future needs of these enterprises. So it's not like the code is the same code that people were implementing in 2016. There are advancements, and because we're the foundation, everything's open. You can go into the wiki and you can go into the GitHub and you can look at all the project roadmaps for all our projects. We have a platform called LFX Insights, the Linux Foundation Insights, and there you can actually look project by project where the code contributions are happening, which companies are contributing to those projects. So everything is open and available for people to see kind of the health of the community as well.
Love that. I'm going to jump to another question. I incorrectly attributed the last question to Mauricio. It was actually Kun. So Kun, sorry for that. I will correct myself. And
I'm listening to you. I'm going to plug in my power. Hold on.
Okay. While Daniela plugs in her power, for those who are watching live on LinkedIn, you can see a beautiful view of sunny Vegas today. I can imagine it's going to be as soon as this is over, straight out either to the pool back there or straight onto the gambling tables. We'll see.
Straight to the airport.
Or straight to the airport. So, question from Michael here. I'm going to pull this one up. Shout to Michael, who's clearly a big fan of digital identity. Which project will be the Hyperledger engine of growth over the next few years? Now, I don't know if you're allowed to have favorites or whether you're not allowed to answer this particular question, but right. Michael's maybe interested in what do you see as some of the triggers for growth? Let's put it that way for some of the projects going forward.
Yeah, well, hi, Michael. Nice to see you. Yeah, it's like asking which one is your favorite child. I think you're not allowed to do that. I only have one, so I always answer that one correctly. So I think it is. So I think there's going to be growth, and this is something very common in open source projects all the time, right? So when you have a new project and the community is growing, you're going to see like a big increase in contributions and participation and use cases until it gets to steady state, right? And then steady state is what needs to be done is you need to have LTS releases. You need to have a very strong commercial ecosystem supporting those code bases. And it goes steady straight because, enterprises, once again, don't want things to change every other week because you can't do that, right? When you're in production with these systems. So you'll see, if you see the growth of projects really, accelerating, things like Firefly, for example, or Besu, they're accelerating because they're getting traction in the market and the users and the developers are coming in to do contributions. So I think, if you look across all our projects, they are following the same level where they have large increases and they continue to go up and then, potentially just level off. And that's healthy, good open source practices because, that's the way these projects have. Michael, I think, you are right. From a digital identity perspective, this is why we made the big bets in 2017 with Hyperledger Indy, and now we have Aries and AnonCreds. And digital identity is obviously something very important. That across the world, organizations are using, technologies that are Hyperledger technologies. Just last night, I heard there's a huge new use case coming out of India that essentially could be issuing close to 5 million verifiable credentials using Hyperledger Aries. So these things are happening. I hear in FinTech Week, I was talking to somebody that's building a KYC platform or has built a KYC platform a company called Instant using Hyperledger Aries. So the identity project certainly a lot of value. And then, obviously the Ethereum client project Hyperledger Besu has had a lot of interest because of the interest in the Ethereum ecosystem. And last year, a lot of people don't know this. Anthony, you probably don't know this, but last year the Ethereum Foundation actually granted the Hyperledger Foundation a grant in order to make sure that Besu, as an execution client on the mainnet, has the support that it needs. Client diversity is very important. Can't all be Geth. So do take a look at that. It's just Google, Ethereum Foundation Client Incentive Program, Besu, and you can see it's a relatively large grant that our community is being taken advantage, is going to be taken advantage of. Love that.
And I assume the grant was in Ethereum too, so that's going to give you your own internal treasury challenge.
Oh my God, it took me, okay, I'm going to say this in public. It took me Hart Montgomery and I, over a year to get a wallet set up, but it's done.
Wow. There is some alpha for all of us. I don't know whether that's ever been said live on a podcast before, but I mean, if a Hyperledger blockchain project can take a year to set up a wallet, then the struggle.
I pushed the first ETH into the Linux Foundation wallet, so it's on the blockchain. It's on the blockchain.
I'm proud of you, Daniela. I'm proud of you. So while we're on the topic of Besu, we were talking about Besu there for a moment, and the question that Mauricio actually did ask was related to the Brazil government using Besu as part of its Brazilian CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency project. Was the foundation or any members of the project or the foundation involved in some of that project work? Are we allowed to know? Do you actually get involved to that level, that extent, as governments are starting to look to set up these sorts of programs?
So for those who are listening might not know, last week, the Central Bank of Brazil made an announcement about their CBDC pilot, and their plan is actually to have their pilot live by 2024. And they made a decision to use Hyperledger Besu. I happen to speak Portuguese, so I got to listen to it in person. And actually that day they made an announcement. I was doing a presentation to the Brazilian regional chapter as well. And they mentioned, why they chose Hyperledger Besu. And it's a lot of the things we've just been talking about, Anthony, right? Which is, they understand that Besu as an open source project in the Linux Foundation, in Hyperledger Foundation, that it's really important if they're going to build critical infrastructure, and that, central bank digital currency for a company, for a country is certainly very critical, that they want to make sure that it's code, that it's open, it's transparent, that they can take a look at, they can understand the commercial ecosystem to support, etc. So to answer the question specifically, for the last 2 years, we've been focused on education around central bank digital currencies and open source. Last May, we published an ebook. It's on our website that highlights some use cases that are using Hyperledger technology, including Fabric, Iroha, and Besu. But more importantly, the why of open source. So what we've done, and this was led by Karen Atoni, who's our Director of Strategic Initiatives, over the last 2 years, was do a lot of education, from having discussions with central banks, but also with organizations like BIS, which is the central bank of central banks, basically, the Bank of International Settlements, the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Last year, we participated as a technical sponsor for their challenge, their CBDC challenge, and just really educating the market. Now, whether the Central Bank of Brazil and many others that have made selections using Hyperledger, we're part of those discussions. We do everything. We try to do everything in the open. It's really about the education. So take a look at that ebook if you haven't looked at it yet. It's available in Japanese, Chinese, and English. And it really talks about why central banks and why governments as a whole should really be thinking about how open source is part of their decision process when they're building out, once again, critical infrastructure for our future.
Love that. Doing the hard yards, doing the difficult work, plowing ahead of time so that when the time comes, at least there's an understanding or an appreciation of the technology that's out there. I've got a couple of quick fire questions because we've got 5 minutes to go. And these are, I mean, they're modestly technical, but we can answer them in a non-technical way, I think. Question here from Maria asks, to what extent any of the Hyperledger teams or projects are looking at zero-knowledge proofs as a means of privacy or as a means of helping around identity? Do we believe that there is a current view from enterprise or government that zero-knowledge proofs may not be as palatable compared to other forms of privacy technology, or is that something that's coming up in any of the discussions we're having?
Well, I would say, take a look at Hyperledger AnonCreds is one of it's an important part of zero-knowledge proof capabilities for verifiable credentials. But the answer is yes. There are multiple conversations, and I lost you here. Hold on. There are multiple conversations going on. And I think very importantly is actually talking to organizations that are doing work specifically with zero-knowledge proofs and seeing how those techniques and the code can potentially also come over to the Hyperledger Foundation.
Nice.
But take a look at some of those projects. But you could start from an identity perspective with AnonCreds.
Very good. And I know that Charles over at Cardano has mentioned that Midnight is going to involve zero-knowledge proof technology as well, but also to some extent keys that can allow for discovery, permission discovery after the fact. So again, an interesting overlap there if Fabric gets involved. So I don't think zero-knowledge is off the table, but enterprises and governments will want to know that there is a level of assurance or a way in which those zero-knowledge proofs can be done in an auditable way.
For sure.
Next random quickfire question, another one from Michael. Chat GPT is getting a little bit of attention. Do you see AI or Chat GPT being involved in any of the Hyperledger projects in future?
Well, I think everybody's been told to use Chat GPT as part of their workflows, for sure. There's actually a very interesting book that was launched a couple of months ago, which is called Tethered AI with Blockchain. The author is Karen Kilroy, and I can send these links out. And they're actually doing some interesting work with Fabric in order to make sure that AI systems are tethered correctly and do not run out of control. Now, some of it is really scary. You start reading about it and you're like, oh my goodness, what are we getting ourselves into? Not the blockchain just part, but the AI. But they're actually using, or they're proposing, and they have a platform that does this already, to use blockchain to tether AI so that there's always a way to revert back to what the initial AI models were. That is proven, that is transparent, that is audible. So it's pretty interesting. So I think that, you will definitely see some things overlap in the AI. The Linux Foundation has a project called the Linux Foundation Data AI, and a lot of open source projects that are focused on data and AI are sitting over there. So our sister project that is addressing a lot of these needs.
Love that. So we'll ask guys to go and check that out over at the Linux Foundation. With a minute left to go, it's time for final thoughts. And I wonder, based on your many years of experience with Hyperledger, with the conversations that you have on a day-to-day basis with enterprise, governments, software developers, project startups, fintechs, all of the above, what would be your short guidance for anybody at this stage in the game getting started or getting interested in using blockchain technology?
Yeah, so from the start, we've really been about educating the market, making those markets and then educating the market as well. So for example, if you just go to our training page, there's an introduction to blockchain courses. We just recently updated that course. There's been over 260,000 students that have gone through that Hyperledger Introduction to Blockchain course as well. We also last year just released a free course. It's an edX course around decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity for people to understand why they should care and what are the main principles around decentralized identity. So highly recommend that. So for people who are just starting off, read the case studies, right? Start with the case studies as well, whether they're coming from Hyperledger or other projects. We have, I think, close to 30 case studies now on our website. We have many use cases also in our showcase. Just understand how people are using the technology. Take those courses. There's developer courses as well, so that people can understand, get in deep with Aries, for example, or Besu or Fabric, of course. So you can do developer courses, do education, go to conferences and events. A lot of discussions. My favorite events to go to nowadays are actually not blockchain events, because I want to talk to people that are using blockchain technologies, but they're really there to talk about the industry needs. Like, for example, the conference I was at this week. But go to the blockchain conferences. I know Paris Blockchain is happening this week, at Consensus in Austin. We're going to be at Blockchain Expo in Santa Clara in California, where our member companies are talking about what they've built, what products and services they've built, whether it's across CBDCs or supply chain or trade finance, healthcare use cases, digital identity across government use cases like the work of Government British Columbia. So read the case studies, do some training, talk to your peers, talk to people internally. There's probably a blockchain project happening at your company somewhere. I am sure of it. They might just not want to talk about it, and educate yourself. And also, reach out to anybody at the Linux Foundation, including myself. We're always happy to guide organizations through the journey.
Thank you so much, Daniela. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking an hour to share your knowledge, your experience with us. Hopefully now, for those who are listening in, you now have a broader and deeper experience of what Hyperledger Foundation is up to. Shout out to you, Daniela. Shout out to the rest of the team for everything that you're doing. Safe travels. I hope you get home and out of Vegas.
Me too.
24 hours in Vegas can be a long 24 hours. So enjoy the rest of them while you're there. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and we'll see you soon. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you.